For our presentation, we will be discussing whether the Free and Appropriate Public Education Act, better known as FAPE, should include ABA services in applicable cases with children who have an autism diagnosis and other mental health problems that may benefit from ABA services in the public educational setting. For this debate, we will have myself, Doug Roberts, as the leader for the group and as the illustrator for the pro-ABA side in the FAPE Act, with Talisa Smith as my fielder/supporter. Presenting for the con-ABA side of the FAPE Act will be Chelsea Silva as the illustrator and Zakira Jackson as the fielder/supporter. The outline of the debate will consist of me giving an introduction, followed by Talisa illustrating for the con side and Chelsea as the supporter for the con side. After Chelsea finishes presenting for the con support role, I will illustrate for the pro ABA side, followed by Zakira in the supporting pro ABA role. The idea of this discussion is to discuss relevant points of interest in providing applied behavioral analysis treatment in an educational setting. We will be touching on some of the benefits and downfalls of having ABA in a public educational setting, as well as discussing some of the rights that individuals are currently entitled to through the IDEA Act, ethical issues with ABA in the public education setting, and defining what is appropriate for a disabled individual. Here's a little rundown on how we got here. FAPE is essentially a revised mandate that better supports Section 504 of the National Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that served as a byproduct of the Civil Rights Movement. Section 504 established non-discrimination policies for federal agencies and state and local programs such as educational institutions that are receiving federal assistance. FAPE was created out of the need to address public school systems that were turning away disabled children while receiving federally assisted funding to educate them. This led to many lawsuits in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, with one in particular, the Mills versus the Board of Education case in 1972, where Public Law 94-142 stemmed and was eventually passed. IDEA, originally known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, defined and outlined in the FAPE mandate that all public schools are to provide all students with a free and appropriate education at the public's expense without additional charge to parents or students, and must be under public supervision as well as appropriate for the child's needs. Public Law 94-142, better known as IDEA, has had many amendments over the years that has affected FAPE, the FAPE mandate. In 1990, Public Law 94142 was revised and renamed IDEA to better suit the needs of all disabled individuals rather than just appealing to the mainstream. The revision led to many amendments that further refined special needs education by requiring all students to have goals that are agreed upon by both the guardians and the school system, taught in the least restrictive environment, as well as requiring all the students to have a post-academic transition plan to help them find or attempt to find gainful employment and access to needed community services. What does all this mean? This means that under IDEA, schools are allowed to use any method they can prove is beneficial to the students' learning, including ABA and various other non-eclectic methods. Goals do not have to be strictly academically based. They can be coping, living, social, and adapting skills to better suit the learner's needs. One problem with all this is that IDEA keeps leaning towards the idea that ABA is too costly and labor intensive, which means that it will be unlikely that IDEA will update their FAPE mandate by requiring educators to provide ABA to all applicable cases. Now I'm going to pass it over to Talissa.
ABA is a science which is social experimentation is used variables
for the
for the
improvement
improvement in that.
It is usually conducted in settings such as preschools, clinics, and in the homes of the participants receiving services. Free and appropriate public education is an educational right of children with disabilities in the U.S. that is guaranteed by the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Individuals with Disabilities Act. In 1991, the U.S. Department of Education introduced autism as an eligibility category for special education services. This means that now children who have a diagnosis of autism with an IEP in the United States who go to public school will receive services in the least restrictive environment. There are many issues with having ABA services be implemented into the curriculum at a public school. Some of those issues or limitations are high staff turnover and shortage of qualified staff, training and retraining needs, overcrowded classrooms, the lack of ABA-based curriculum methods. Today, I will speak about some of the limitations for ABA to be properly implemented into public school settings and why it should not be added into the curriculum. First reason I want to talk about is that teachers cannot accommodate because there is no time. There are large numbers in the classrooms, in most classrooms in elementary school and high school. I live in Chicago, and on average, there is about 20% of Chicago public schools classrooms that are overpopulated with up to 23 more students than the maximum suggested amount. Most teachers are trained using the biological model where learning is self-motivated. Most of the interventions in ABA are motivated by reinforcers or bribes. This type of teaching does not appeal to educators. It's out of the norm for them. And because of that, it's sometimes hard to get them to cooperate with ABA intervention in the classrooms. Educators are also skeptical about the need for clinical intervention models in schools. Participants in the thesis conducted by Lincoln Camus stated that teachers often feel significant pressure to emphasize academics. After all, they are educators. And as a result, behavior needs a lower priority on their list of things to do. Teachers feel that if behavior intervention is needed, it should be carried out by school psychologists and social workers who have the clinical training needed to address the issues. They also mentioned that some general education teachers have conflicting views about having students with autism in their classrooms. Given that children with autism come with a severity of disabilities, many general education teachers do not have the confidence in their ability to teach this population effectively. It's difficult. They are already teaching at large they have to us and provide modifications for that student, assist with their emotional and problem behaviors, and still tend to the other 20 or 30 students in their class. Participants of the Camus study mentioned that behavior techniques used in ABA-based intervention have often been associated with animal experiments and other research performed by behaviorists decades ago, most of which use punishment. Most of the teachers who are educators are not educated on what ABA is, and they have a fear of the unknown. If they have not been trained or taught what to do, they aren't receptive to what it is that should be done. In the gen ed setting, teachers if they had it their way, they would just stick to what they know and let the professionals who have extensive training in ABA and know how to operate well within it complete those services. In most cases, this is what's best for the child anyway. Ethical Code 1.02 of the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code for Behavior Analysts require board-certified behavior analysts to only provide and teach services within their realm of competence. The same should go for educators providing services in public schools. There are limited resources available to them, and oftentimes they are implementing ABA techniques that they have no idea about besides the surface explanations provided by their supervisors, who 90% of the time are also not experts. Special ed teachers also have so much to do. in the study by Hamu, a participant in the study who was a special education teacher in an ABA-based program, explained that she felt that, unlike the general ed teachers, she had 2 jobs to do, and often does lead to burnout. Not only are they responsible for teacher duties, they also have to write IEPs, train paraprofessional staff to implement what is outlined in the IEP. They also have to supervise and sometimes take over because there is typically no official training for those paraprofessionals to complete the necessary tasks in the school setting. In the school, most times the main focus is educational goals. It's a school. That's typically what students go there for. The budget is set up to reach those goals. It's unfortunate, but oftentimes the needs of those with special needs, including ABA, are neglected because the staff members working with them do not have the necessary skills and the school does not have the funds to provide the necessary things they need to complete the treatment. I'm gonna pass it over to Chelsea.
Hi, I'm Chelsea, and I will be talking about, I'll be the illustrator and fielder. I'll be supporting the opposing side with supportive material. I think sometimes being in this field, we are so quick to support the idea of ABA in the classroom. And I think that's one deficit I had when we started this debate, that I wouldn't be able to support this side. But after doing research and looking more into this, I feel we're quick to support it, but we fail to see how it may not be possible to do this in the classroom, and the treatment may not be implemented with fidelity. We fail to look at ethical issues that can arise from implementing ABA in the schools. Ethical standards have to be implemented in order to ensure protection of the client, and that everything being done is held to a standard, and that the client's needs are being met. The first one being is, how will data be tracked? We know the first thing in ABA is that we can change behavior, but we have to have data to support that. We have to have baseline data. We have to have our intervention data, and we're all trained on how to collect data. So people in the schools, they're not going to be able to collect data the way we are. And in order to ensure that we're providing the correct intervention, we look at the data to make sure that we're decreasing or perhaps increasing, in some cases, the behavior. So that's like one of the biggest downfall, is data is not going to be implemented or collected correctly. There's no way for one teacher to monitor all the children and track data on that one child. This goes against the ethical code of responsible conduct, implementing with integrity, and also implementing with areas that we're competent in. Most teachers are not trained in the area of ABA. I see kids coming out of our clinic on a daily basis where the teachers just suspend them, which we all know just reinforces the behavior. So they spend half their time at home anyway, so they don't get the education that they need, which again leads to more ethical dilemmas that arrive. The teachers are most likely not trained to implement interventions or interventions in the behavior plan. This also adds to who trains these teachers on the behavior plans. And as mentioned, we're not able to implement just one therapist, so there would be multiple therapists needed. Sometimes I know in our clinic, when we have kids in crisis, we're unable to do it alone as one therapist, and we have to call in multiple therapists. So I couldn't imagine in a classroom that teachers are able to call in several teachers to help. They also state they provide acceptable standards, but who sets these standards? What's considered acceptable? I know as a parent, I want the best for my child, but does the school, what do they consider the best? I think that's one thing we also have to look at, because if I send my kid to school, I want him to have the best treatment possible. But who defines the acceptable standard? Also, what happens if there's a behavior that arises that's not in the behavior plan? Then who decides what to do? I know in the schools here in South Carolina, there's one BCBAD that oversees the entire school. We see children come in our clinic with plans. They see the BCBAD, and then 3 months later, she still hasn't seen anyone. So she's seeing too many clients. She's not getting implementation done. the school system's continuing to fail our children day in and day out. There was a study conducted that found all the problems with having ABA implemented in school, and it basically talked about how we don't have the right materials, we don't hold the conducts as we're supposed to as therapists. I wanted to briefly touch on that. We failed to mention that as therapists, we know how to conduct the training, we know how to do the interventions, we know how to do protocols, but as the teachers, they are not trained, and behavior plans are set out for children, but when they need to be changed, they're not changed. A random teacher just comes and decides to change it. So there's a lot of ethical issues that arise with having ABA in the classroom. And even though I fully support ABA, I can see why ABA should not be allowed in the classroom. So I'm going to pass it back to Doug.
Nice points, Chelsea. I'm going to be illustrating for the pro-ABA side in the public educational setting. So the first thing that come to mind are some funding issues. An article by Duncan and Ali addressed these in 1999, stating that IDEA established non-discrimination policies for federal agencies and state and local programs such as educational institutions that are receiving federal assistance. This means all disabled individuals in the USA ages 3 to 21 are entitled to a meaningful education regardless of the teaching method at no expense or extra cost to the student or the guardians. Some of this falls under an appropriate education for a meaningful education, and under Section 504 of the National Rehabilitation Act defines an appropriate education as the following: education may comprise as education in the client's least restrictive environment while either in the regular classroom, education in the regular classroom with an aide or a professional, or partial and all-day special education services. What is appropriate? Appropriate also means that the student will learn skills that are relevant to their lifestyle and obtainable, set mutually agreed upon goals, a transition plan for life after school, and connections to community services for the disabled. The problem with appropriate is that even though IDEA states that any beneficial technique may be used, the chosen technique must still be chosen by the school board, which seems to be a tall order to ABA. In an article by Robert Crabtree in 2010, ABA is labeled as being disruptive educational method that is costly, labor intensive, due to the fact that staff must be highly trained in order to maintain treatment fidelity. And at times, ABA can be demeaning to the students, and it can reduce autonomy, as well as going on to say that ABA will likely not be recognized as a common treatment method to the educational system when it is up for debate against other educational and treatment methods. Some other things under the FAPE mandate and IDEA include IEPs. This entitles individuals to a customized education plan with goals that are agreed upon by the student and their guardians and the school board, all mutually. This allows students with an autism diagnosis the right to an effective education, therefore allowing behavior analysts to create plans using evidence-based practices. This can lead to a more customized learning experience that will teach the client how to better cope with their disability rather than wasting the student's time learning irrelevant skills. One recent example where a family was violated of their child's IDEA educational rights is mentioned in an article by Easterbrooks et al. 2004, where 2 deaf children were awarded $2.5 million for being denied an appropriate education by failing to provide the children with a communication modality or a certified teacher for the deaf. This case is a direct violation of the FAPE mandate as well as the client's were not given a mutually agreed upon individualized education plan between the client's caregivers and the school. This is also a violation of the FAPE mandate in terms of not allowing the client a decent level of autonomy through the lack of communication and therefore violating the least restrictive environment right. There are some benefits associated with receiving an appropriate education. When an appropriate education is obtained, an individual gains their maximum amount of independence and autonomy, and then they will be able to decrease their need for both beneficial and daily living assistance, which will decrease the financial burden of caring for the disabled while increasing the individual's ability to care for themselves. Increasing autonomy and independence is one of our core ethical procedures and is listed in the text as well. How should the FAPE mandate be updated? The first mandate's idea should incorporate the use of an implied behavior analysis treatment plan in the educational setting that is based off of evidence-based practices and is implemented by qualified staff to ensure treatment fidelity. The second mandate should include that direct funding should be supplied to the student if the local schools are financially unable to provide the client ABA services or a meaningful education. I'm going to now pass this over to Zakira.
Hello, I am Zakira, and I'm supporting that FAPE provide mandatory ABA in schools. The IDEA must take into the account the specific needs of individuals with developmental disorders. The specific needs of these individuals become overlooked because Congress failed to provide a substantive definition of FAPE. In 1973, there have been many changes to ABA therapy, and therefore revisions to the 504 Rehabilitation Act should be required. ABA therapy in classrooms will benefit children not only in education, but it can help with social interaction with peers and decrease any problem behaviors that may arise in classrooms. A free and appropriate education was designed for all students and not just children with developmental disorders to have equal education and opportunity. Some children with autism spectrum disorders may have behaviors that are self-injurious and aggressive, which puts the individual and students around them in physical harm. Behaviors may have the individual removed from the classroom and put into a restrictive environment. And part of the FAPE is including children in a least restrictive environment. ABA in the class can help to decrease those problem behaviors and keep the students in that classroom. ABA principles and methods that are effectively applied within educational settings can lead to accurate assessment of skill levels in all areas of functioning. Individual curriculum for systematic skill development in all areas like play, motor skills, communication, speech, behavior, academic skills, and social interaction. The FAPE have many gray areas in what is considered minimum. ABA therapy is a great benefit to individuals with developmental disorders, especially autism. Some may say ABA is not the only intervention successful to individuals with developmental disorders. There have been studies that have looked at ABA in comparison to other treatments, like intensive elective intensive intervention. These studies were done by Howard, Sparkman, and Stainslaw in 2005. Again, the results of their study show that children with intensive ABA treatment perform better on post-treatment testing than either of. And more alarming, the fact that the children who received non-intensive intervention showed a regression in skills in post-test. I'm going to show a graph of intensive behavior therapy versus the other interventions. The participants were 61 children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders or pervasive developmental disorders, not otherwise specified. Participants were referred by nonprofit agencies under contract with the State of California Department of Developmental Services to provide treatment for individuals with developmental disabilities. Screen for following eligibility criteria: diagnosis of autism disorder or PDD-NOS according to the DSM-4, qualified independent examiners before the child was 48 months of age. English had to be primary language spoken in the child's home. No significant medical condition other than ASD or PDD-NOS, and that they had no prior treatment of more than 100 hours. The figure showing that. Okay, in the first figure, sorry guys. Okay, in the first figure, you can see in the intensive behavior treatment that they actually did increase educational skills. It says receptive language learning rates prior to intake, which are the circles that are unfilled, and follow-up after about 14 months of intervention, and those are the darker circles. The dashed line indicates the normal learning rate, 1 year of development for each year of age. The first column, you can see the progression of the students, and in the other columns, you can see that they really didn't progress. Same in figure 2. Expressive language learning rates prior to intake were the unfilled circles, and follow-up after about 14 months of intervention were the filled circles. The dashed line indicates the normal learning rate, once again. Okay. Some concerns of having mandatory ABA in schools include finances, treatment fidelity, and teachers not being trained on implementing ABA. All children with developmental disorders have an opportunity to receive an individualized educational program, or IEP. According to greatschools.org, the individualized educational program is a written document that's developed for each child who is eligible for special education. The IEP is created through a team effort and reviewed at least once a year. At this time, the child's specific needs are assessed and addressed. If the child is already receiving ABA services, he may already have a behavior analyst that teachers can collaborate with, which can cut the cost of providing ABA in schools. The specific need of the child to have therapy in order to learn and attend in the classrooms. IEPs are developed specific to that child and contain measurable target goals laid out in systematic developmental progression. ABA incorporates many strategies, methods, techniques, and principles to improve people's ability and quality of life. Without some classroom assistance, you have to question if that child is in fact receiving a minimum and equal education. States there are governmental assistance provided to individuals based on need to receive ABA. That same assistance should be provided in the schools. The next concern is treatment fidelity. If ABA becomes mandatory, there should be a requirement for instructors and assistants to be trained in ABA during IEP meetings or any other meetings for that child. BCBA should go over individual treatment plans for the child. According to the Compliance Code 2.09, clients have the right to effective treatments. That should be in every environment. ABA outside of school, also behavior analysts have the responsibility to advocate for appropriate amount of level of service provision and oversight required to meet defined behavior change programs. This should also adhere to the classroom. According to Compliance Code 7.0, behavior analysts have an ethical responsibility to all professional colleagues, which should include appropriate training to them as well. A large number of ABA principles already occur within our educational programs and classrooms. Without knowledge, individuals naturally employ the principles of ABA in their teaching, such as reinforcement, motivation, modeling, and so on. These techniques can be used with all learners at all age levels, such as preschool children, typical children, and children with ASD. ABA principles have been used to teach various skills for all individuals. Many research studies have highlighted the benefits to using instructional materials created using ABA principles for all learners. Nevertheless, many of our typical children adapt to many teaching styles and methodologies. Children with ASD, however, exhibit unique learning styles that match the instructional methods found within the field of ABA. FAPE should provide mandatory ABA because for many children with ASD, learning does not take place when other instructional methods are employed without intensive therapy. To simply offer the bare minimum of the FAPE requirements is not enough. And that concludes my support of ABA.
Nice points, Talisa. That's all I have for today on this FAPE project. So I'll talk to you guys later and have a good semester. Bye.